Welcome, everybody. Today, Kathleen and I are here with Sara Artemisia, and she is a second time guest on the podcast. We loved having her on. I think it was last summer, talking about the um, rose, I remember, and the feminine archetypes. And it was just such a beautiful conversation. And so, definitely, if you haven't heard that episode, please listen to it because it was just such a great conversation. And today we're going to shift a little bit with our talk about plants, still focused on essences and the spirits of the plants, but this time we're talking about money and having an abundance mindset. So we've had this request from a few of our listeners before, and didn't didn't go there yet, but last winter I heard Sara talking on another podcast, and it was all about that. It was all about developing a money mindset and this beautiful holistic way grounded with the earth and working with all of the pieces and parts and blocks that are part of accepting that abundance into our life. And I thought, okay, she's the one. This is what we've been waiting for. So now we can have this conversation. And so here we are. And I'll just read you her bio before we get started. So Sara Artemisia is a plant spirit wisdom teacher, a flower essence practitioner, a financial coach, and the host of the Plant Spirit podcast. She helps wellness professionals and empaths clear their inner blocks, transform their experience with money, and connect more deeply with their inner guidance and the earth. Having always felt connected to nature and the sacred foundation of life, Sara has also experienced a profoundly transformational shift in her own relationship with money in this life. Sara has a master's degree in organizational financial management and is a certified money coach, and she utilizes a conscious ecosystems framework in all of her work. She's seen that when people who are oriented towards helping the world become a better place get clear and aligned with their money, then money becomes a transformational tool for healing the world. Welcome, Sara.
Thank you. So great to be here with you both. Excited for our conversation today.
We've really been looking forward to spending time with you again. And I guess the first question really is how did you create this bridge? You know, there's the money world, and then there's the flower essence world and the plant spirit world. Where did those two worlds intersect, and how did you bridge that gap?
That is such a great question. My own family asks me this question all the time. So essentially, I feel like with the plant work, the work with money, and actually the experience of being human is that they're all very similar in the way that with the plants, for example, they're very three-dimensional. We can interact. There's giant rose bush. Of course, we're definitely going to be talking about rose again today, of course. Um, this giant rose bush right here, I can see and interact with this rose bush. And also in that spectrum from very, very practical to very etheric, we can work with the essences, connect with the plant spirits, commune with them in meditation. Similarly with money, it's very three-dimensional. We have credit cards, we have coins, dollar bills, and also we can work with money in this way that is very etheric and working with it on the energetic level. Similarly, in this way of how the internal and the external reflect and affect each other, and everything is related in this world, just like being a human, where we are very three-dimensional, we are in these human bodies, and yet we can also be very multidimensional at the same time in terms of how we're experiencing reality while being very grounded and rooted in this body. And so in my experience with any modality that I'm working with, the main core focus is how to help people really come into what I call embodying the cosmic soul self in this life. And what I found is that these two modalities, working with plants and working with money, really support that. The plants specifically support us with healing different things that are blocking us from doing that. And when we work with money, we find that a lot of our traumas and things that are connected to dysfunctional aspects of our life, certainly dysfunctional aspects of what's going on in the world, are connected to that. And so when we heal and align our relationship with money, so much it ripples out and impacts everything else. And so that's specifically why I love these two modalities. And also, the plants have been with me my entire life, and I've personally experienced a massive healing in my own relationship with money, and that then spurned my work in the financial coaching realm.
Yeah, and this topic is so loaded. I mean, there's so many places to that we could go, but talking about blocks and our beliefs about deservability, our fears, where those come from. Do they come from the way that we were raised? Are they ancestral and that we're carrying, a mindset that didn't originate with us? Um, how do you start to navigate that with a client? And then how do the plants come in to those sessions?
Yeah, this is a great question. So, as with all subconscious patterning that we have in this life, so much of it begins in our family of origin. Maybe by the time we're about age 4, we've adopted these patterns, these stories around money as if they are true. And then very often, most people will go through the rest of their entire life living out these patterns as if they are true in the experience with money. And so when working with folks, I love to start at the beginning with actually a money biography where they go through every single year of their life, talking about an experience that they've had with money or something that they witnessed with money. And then, most importantly, any feelings that they have associated with that experience. And so, this is where the essences can come in such a big way, because certainly there is a whole realm of plants that can help us align with the abundance vibration, the frequency of abundance for sure. Rose certainly being what anyone in the rose family, any fruit producing plant, all of the mints. I mean, even the word mint also is synonymous with an industrial thing that makes money. So it's interesting even in that way. But I love working with the plants that support connecting with abundance like that. Um, there are other, I'll just share a few others in that realm as well, because they're coming up, which is, for me, I've worked a lot with Bay to connect with abundance, because I experience personally that Bay really supports an experience of third eye vision somatically throughout the entire body, and that's really supportive for me in creative projects. So when we look at abundance and, what ways do we want to call abundance into our life? Is it through just connecting with it as an energetic concept, in which case rose, mint, that could be really helpful? Or is there something creative that we're working on that we'd really like help to have that flow happening? For me, Bay is so supportive in that way. Rosemary, I found incredibly supportive for working with, specifically in both the way that the archetypal energetic of that plant works, and then also in Rosemary's connection with the bees, who I really feel are the earth's alchemists. I love the bees so much. And then interestingly, with cacao, so this past month with my advanced plant spirit wisdom class, we've been working with the spirit of cacao. And I had this really interesting experience in journeying with cacao last month, where I saw how cacao, the actual tree, where the the pods of the cacao grow right on the tree trunk, which is very unusual for trees. And I was seeing this holographic overlay with Artemis of Ephesus, who, if you don't know who that is, would definitely recommend Googling her up. She's an ancient mother goddess in Western Turkey who looks like she's an ancient bee goddess. So I started working with her very deeply in connection with the bees last year when I was working with bees. And then she came back around with cacao this year, where I was seeing, oh, she is this mother goddess. And in many different societies where cacao is native to, the cacao beings were the currency of that culture. So that's an incredible, incredible plant to work with. And interestingly, one of the cultures that is still very vibrantly alive, one of the indigenous cultures is still very vibrantly alive that works with cacao in a very sacred way, is the Bribri culture in Southeast Costa Rica. And they are a matrilinear society, which that can tell us a lot, I feel, about how to heal our relationship with money if we look at how they are orienting to the cacao tree, because so much of what's happened in the dysfunctionality of how money is functioning in our society has to do with these archetypal patterns of the patriarchy and how that has influenced how we are oriented to money, because inherently money in itself is not bad. It's just how our society is oriented to it, how we are oriented to it based on our inner beliefs and the patterning that we grew up with, which is, you mentioned lineage work, so connected to how our parents grew up. And just as with all ancestral work, all lineage work, the patterns will be subconsciously passed down through the generations until someone takes a stand and say, hey, I'm going to change this pattern consciously. And so money is a very powerful modality to work with in that way. So there are these plants that can help us connect with abundance, but specifically with what you were talking about here, healing different blocks or clearing different blocks, like you mentioned, the deservability, different fears, how we were raised, the ancestral patterns around money, that is going to be unique to every person. And so very often in the financial coaching sessions, I don't bring essences into every one of those sessions because not every person that I'm working with in the financial coaching realm would consider themselves to be a plant person, but the plants are always present no matter what, whether we're talking about them consciously or they're in the background. And so for folks who are interested in coupling the essence work with the financial coaching, I love that, because that to me, I'm like, that's the bridge. We're just bringing it all out front and center with bringing those two together. And so in that case, so we'll do the money biography, and it's so fascinating to hear, first off, what is the person's first memory of money? Is their first memory of money, does it feel good, or is it kind of traumatic? It's really interesting to just start with that and then look at these different themes or patterns of imprints that have happened in the very early childhood around money, or early life, like pre-teenagehood, around money, and how that has impacted how they're orienting to money. So very often we'll be working with essences that are helping to heal blocks that were formed in that time. And so, for example, I was just even trying to think of some essences that have come up in the past couple of weeks around this with clients. And so that has included Mariposa Lily, so much working with the mother wound, that can be really supportive. Tree medicine can be incredibly supportive. There's one client I was working with who she self-reported this, and I also was witnessing it, that her energy would get really stuck in her head and she felt very disconnected from her body. And it's really hard to connect with an experience of abundance if we're just living in our head. The abundance of the planet is a very embodied experience to connect with that. And so I found that working with tree medicine, or in her case, definitely working with tree medicine, it allowed her tree essences to really drop her energy and awareness into the fullness of her body. And then from that, she was able to experience what abundance actually feels like, because she was even able to feel what her whole body feels like. And so that can be really helpful. Certainly for folks who are creative, we worked with Indian paintbrush before. That's so supportive, in a very similar way that personally I work with Bay for supporting with the creative projects. For folks who are more creative with their hands, Indian paintbrush can be so supportive for bringing that flow of abundance through in their art. And then another client recently, and this may not, off the top, you might not think of this plant as being one that would be supportive for abundance, but it really was in her case. And it was pink yarrow, because it was really supportive. What she was doing is so we were doing this inner work around the patterning from her past with, okay, how did the subconscious patterns form around money? Let's look at that, and then let's work to clear those out. But what she was having in her current reality is that she was still currently, to this day, being very influenced by her mother's perspectives and views on what she should be doing professionally, what she should be doing in her professional and personal life as well. And so we worked with Pankiaro to specifically help her to create that compassionate boundary in the heart around, okay, really, what is hers? What is her mom's? Because if she is personally working on healing all of this experience in her relationship with money, but she's still got this, very open funnel of all of her mom's, criticisms or judgments or what she should be doing, kind of a thing, that's going to be really challenging for her to stay connected continuously to, on the core level, what is true for her. And so I just love that about the essences, how they can really support us with specifically what are the specific things that we need help with clearing out or smoothing out, or I'll often see it like these kinks of energetic lines in the energy field of the person, that the essences will actually go in on that vibrational level and help to smooth those out so that essentially it comes back to functioning as an ecosystem of recognizing there, if we look at, and something that can be so helpful in the work of connecting with abundance and really having a good, clear relationship with money, is you could think of it as the frameworks of wholeness, and really what is, and for everyone listening out there to just consider in this moment, what is the biggest model of wholeness in your life? What is that? And for me, it's nature. That by far is the biggest model of wholeness in my life. And so I bring that model of wholeness into all of my work, and definitely with money, because there's a couple of ways to approach that. One is when we're looking at healing something around money that's feeling stagnant or stuck or that we're struggling with, we could look at, okay, like if nature was running my life, how would nature address this issue with money, for example? And then that can provide a really helpful imprint, model, suggestion for understanding how to move forward with it. But the other thing is, if we look at, or if you think about, how is money functioning in your life right now? Is it something that is integrated into the integrity and wholeness of the ecosystem of your life? Or is it off to the side? And so the way that I was raised very clearly was to see money as being completely separate from the rest. It's like, okay, you have life, you're engaging, you're in the heart, you're connected to things. And then there's money, the root of all evil, up or off to the side. You try to avoid it as much as possible unless you have to deal with it, kind of a thing. That was the narrative that I was raised with. And so a huge part of what I did in my personal work at the beginning with money was really recognizing, oh, hey, turns out money's connected to pretty much everything in life in terms of how our world is structured. What happens if I bring money in alignment as an ally, bringing it into the integral aspect of the ecosystem, just like how water, for example, functions in an ecosystem? How does the relationship and, importantly, practical experience with money shift when we bring it into the ecosystem of wholeness in the entire life? It's a completely different experience in terms of how we relate to and work with it on a daily practical level.
There is so much in there. And I'm trying to loop back to a piece that I wanted to open up a little bit more, because I love the way you describe it as being, a water flow that needs to be released in order for it to flow appropriately. And I think that that's exactly what essences do in everything they work on. I mean, they do that in stuck emotions. They can also do it in stuck parts of our life that are very manifest, like money. And that quality of flow, of alignment and flow, is so important. And yet there's this huge piece with a lot of people around money, especially a lot of spiritual healers that, want to serve the world, that they feel like everything should go out and there's no openness to receive. And that feels like such a huge block for so many people, that they, there's self-worth. They don't feel like they should be doing better than just barely starving. There's such a huge piece in there. I'd love to hear you talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, but then there's so many layers even in what you just shared. So the first thing is, if you think about in that ecosystem model, if the water is just going out, if the water is only ever just going out, you're going to dry up. It's like you're not gonna, so it's really important to look at it as a cycle. And this is where nature can be so supportive in helping us understand, you know, so for example, the model of how money functions that most of us are accustomed to is the late stage capitalistic model that our society exists in, which is one of exponential growth, which is totally not sustainable and will collapse. So that is okay, that's what the majority of society is living in and working with. However, if we go back before that started, we can see this wisdom of the ancient wisdom of nature, which functions in cycles and works in circles, and it lives in a state of wholeness. And so when we, from that external aspect, we can look at, okay, how can we start to orient to money in a way that is honoring of the cycles? And so working with this energy of money, working with it as you would with water can be very helpful, specifically for folks who work in the healing modalities, because water is the hydrologic cycle. So the other thing that you were just talking about with how often healers, empaths, wellness professionals, they can often have this block around money. And really, what is that all about? There are two layers that I really feel are key in this: the internal and the external. And so if we look at just take a step back for a moment and look at the societal beliefs around money, one of the ones that I see coming up so big with folks who are connected to healing is around their beliefs of what people who have a lot of money are like. And for example, a big one that often comes up in working together is around this belief of, well, people who have a lot of money have exploited other people to get there, or they've exploited the earth to get there, kind of a thing. And so if I have a lot of money, that means I must have stepped on a lot of people or destroyed a lot of things to get there. And so I frequently see that pattern specifically playing out with folks who earn a lot of money, but then have a really hard time keeping it. Because if they kept it, that might mean that they are then like those people who do that, who run, the multinational corporations that are exploiting the earth, are exploiting people. And so one of the biggest sticking points that I see around that is for people who have that belief, if we look at, okay, well, multinational corporations are also exploiting money, because money at its core essence is not inherently bad. It's just, how are we as humans working with it? And so if you look at that model of, for example, okay, people who have a lot of money have exploited people to get there, or have exploited the earth to get there, it's like, well, yeah, they've also exploited money to get there. And so, like, in the same way that money, and in the same way that the earth and people are not bad, money also is not inherently bad. And so when we recognize that, that can be really helpful for looking at the bigger picture goal that I have around money, which is recognizing that for people who are oriented towards healing in the world, in general, most things in your life, maybe everything in your life, is oriented towards healing. The people you're hanging out with, likely the food you're eating, the types of activities you enjoy. So when you bring money into alignment with that, money then becomes a tool for transformational healing as well. And so that is a really big paradigm shift that I see can happen with folks who are healers, who are empaths, who may have this initial aversion to money based on both their internal patterning that they got from their parents, which they might be living the similar or same patterns that they got from their parents, or they might have done a 180, said, I absolutely do not want to do that, and then had a reactionary approach that's exactly the opposite of what their parents are. And also just the wider world of how we're seeing money functioning in the wider world and how dysfunctional that is. So just because something, and this is like with all shadow work, right? Like when we're talking about money, we definitely start talking about getting into healing those shadows. And this is where I see that the flower essences can be so supportive, because we do not need to bring those, like when we bring those shadows out, and put them in front of us, on the table from a space of compassion, they can heal. Versus if we are judging those shadows, bringing up a lot of shame and guilt and just self-hatred, like all that kind of stuff, that those shadows are not going to heal. And so the money work pairs so well with the essences because so often there are both these internal beliefs and these bigger beliefs around society that the plants can help us. And I can't remember which one of you I was hearing talking about this recently around how so often when we work with essences, it's like we might think we have a goal or an objective of, I'm currently here in my current state with my orientation to this thing. I want to get there. Then we take the essences, and what we find is instead our whole awareness relaxes and opens up so that we have an entire it's not even a perspective shift in terms of moving from one side to the other. It's like an opening. It's just like a spherical opening in terms of how we're orienting to that thing. And so that's really why I love bringing the essences into the work with money, because it can help facilitate and really catalyze that experience of shifting those patterns that are not serving in terms of how we're orienting to money.
Yeah, that is there's so much that I want to comment on as well that the one thing that strikes me is that money as an ally, and I've heard you talk about that before. And when I first heard it, that that was kind of a profound statement. That really struck me because here I am, have been working with plants as allies for so many years, and I never thought about money that way. I never thought about money being an ally. And when I think about that as being a friend, then the concept of having a relationship with it completely changes for me. So, I mean, I've heard that forever about, repairing your relationship with money and all of that. So, it wasn't until thinking about it as an ally that that really sort of landed with me. And I so appreciate that because it sort of changes everything. And thinking about money too as part of the earth and part of the planet and our relationship with the planet, just like our relationship with nature, and even going back to our earliest forms of money, which were nature, as you were saying, with like cacao beans. And I believe there's been other forms of things from nature that were used for trading and you know um in all the indigenous cultures, before we got printing presses and started making money. Um, and even even our precious metals like gold, which our money system is based on, is from the earth. And so it is connected. It's a representation of something from the planet, from Mother Earth. And so I and speaking of gold is also a gem elixir that I love to use in some of these cases. And a lot of times it's about somebody helping to see their own inner value, but there's an aspect of it that helps to also understand that your value in the context of the whole makes a win-win dynamic. And so to me, there's such wisdom there because in our late stage capitalist society, everything is a zero sum game. Like for somebody to do well, somebody else has to do bad. Like, as you say, somebody who's got money means that they're taking it away from somebody else. And that is a really hard thing to unwind in a capitalist culture like this. So I like to I'd love to hear how you help to do that. Um, because it's so big and it's so embedded and it's so ingrained in us, whether it's from this lifetime or we're carrying it forward, but just in everything that we are constantly bombarded with our media. It is all about somebody wins and somebody loses.
This is where I am so grateful for my Quaker upbringing. So, for those of you who are not familiar with Quakers, Quakers are so equality based. There's no hierarchy in Quakerism. The Services are held completely in silence. There's no person standing up at the front of the room. Everyone comes in as equals. Services are held completely in silence. When someone feels called to speak, they speak. It could be 585, going back hundreds of years, didn't matter if you were a man or a woman, and then sit back down. And then everyone's message is treated equally. And so in my experience, this is also how nature works, that nature is not hierarchical, that nature honors all. And so this is really important when we're looking at what is the paradigm that we really want to be moving into on this planet. And this is why a lot of us who are here tuning into this podcast are here today to help with this great transition globally, which that could be on a big scale, that could be in a very, very local scale. But just like in the same way that every plant in the ecosystem has a role to fulfill, it's really important for us to get clear about like what is my role in this life, in this world to help this world in a way that is not self-depleting, but in a way that honors all, that honors the self, that honors all life. And when we bring money into alignment with that, it's like we're healing these thousands of years of dysfunctional orientation. It's kind of a revolutionary act, honestly, to work with money in this way of reshaping the way that we are orienting to money. And so on a very practical level, something that can be really helpful with this, which is something that you alluded to, is looking at how do you relate to money? Like if money was a person in your life, how would you describe that relationship? And the goal in the work with money is to get to a point where we are a long-term friend, where money is there with us as an ally through every single thing that we are doing. And if you think about, like, for example, if you had tons of money, what would you do with it? You'd probably be a philanthropist. Like you would probably give it away, right? And so you having tons of money is not a bad thing because you're going to do with it what you do with everything in your life, which is to help support the planet in healing. Like that's what we're all doing here on some level. So that's really key. The other thing that's really key though around that is really recognizing how we have been conditioned to orient to life as if things are separate from each other. And money is one of the big money and nature, actually. So this is like why these two modalities really speak to me, because we have been conditioned in our society to treat nature as an other and to treat money as an other. And so what happens when we bring our relationship with those two into a deep, intimately integrated aspect of our awareness, because in fact, they are connected with who we are, whether we want to acknowledge that or not. And one way that we can work with that, just like in the same way, and I love how the plants do this, how the plants have a fractal consciousness where when we look at a plant through the microscope of its being, we can understand the entire nature of reality. In the same way, when we look at money through a microscope, it becomes a fractal for understanding what needs to be healed, what needs to be healed in our own personal life, what needs to be healed in the way that the world is functioning. And because the way that the world is functioning can be so vastly overwhelming at times to deal with, it can be so helpful to start with that microcosm level of just the self of, okay, how am I orienting to money? And what would my life look like if money was functioning in an experience of wholeness? How would that change? How would that change what I am doing? And how would the experience with money change if you worked with it as an ally for your healing work in the world? How would that, like, what would that allow you to do more fully with your work in the world? Probably a lot more because of the way that our society is oriented towards money. So those are some key frameworks. And on a more minute level, or say a practice that could potentially be helpful for starting to shift this, is is thinking about your mindfulness practice and considering, okay, what is it that you do for your mindfulness practice if you have one? Or if you don't have one, you could just think about being aware of your breathing, being aware of the quality of your breath. And so, an interesting experiment to do with money, an interesting practice could be to do 1 to 5 minutes of your mindfulness practice, whether that's yoga, meditation, Reiki, deep breathing, whatever that might be, and then have an experience with money and play with it as an extension from your mindfulness practice and see how that shifts. See how that shifts how you're orienting to money in that moment, whether that's paying for groceries or checking your credit card bill or something else that might be happening maybe later today in your experience with money. And then also how how your experience with money shifts, and also how your experience of your own lived experience of your nervous system shifts in that moment. Because so often what can happen in the experience with money is that there is this, and I see this a lot with folks who are healers and empaths, is this experience of avoidance and anxiety that is like immediately thinking about money. And with most folks, the experience of money, whether they are recognizing it or not, can bring up an experience of anxiety for them. And so if you think about how you make decisions when you're in a hyper aroused state of anxiety, that's not going to be as aligned as if you're making a decision from a place of calmness. And so that's where this practice with the mindfulness piece can be really supportive.
I appreciate that you're offering some, concrete steps for people because it is such a huge and shadowed issue. As you've been talking, I've really been thinking about this aspect of in indigenous cultures, they would do ceremony around welcoming the rain and welcoming a good harvest and interacting with the earth in a way that affirms that they belong there, that affirms that they have a right to thrive and do well, but also is a conscious interaction with the intelligence of nature. And on some way, I think this work that you're doing is creating that consciousness in our modern minds where we think we're separate from we might be able to most of our listeners are probably feel like they can connect to nature. Okay, cool. But being divorced from the world around us, which is involving a lot of times, money and modern things. And to be able to enfold that into our vision of all of this belongs to the world. All of this belongs to nature. All of this belongs to our inheritance, our birthright of living here, of being human beings in this moment, to be able to do something really great with our lives because we're supposed to.
Exactly. And that just really brings up for me that guiding question that guides so much in my life and I think can be so helpful in the process and experience with money and healing different blocks around money is just bringing in this question of what would nature do? What would nature do in the experience with money in whatever you are being faced with in this moment, and just see how that shifts in terms of any internal guidance you receive around how to address whatever situation is that you're looking at with money.
Thank you for sharing your insights on helping us all heal these relationships that are so fraught with so many. When you said, how would you describe your relationship? I think 90% of people listening are like, it's complicated. So thank you very much for helping to open this conversation, and we really appreciate your work, and we really appreciate what you're doing to help healers of all kinds restore a healthy relationship or create a healthy relationship around abundance and money and all of that. Can you share with us a little bit of what you're up to these days and what your offerings are?
Sure. Thanks for asking. So, obviously, financial coaching and flower essences are a huge part of that. And so, if you're interested in doing either or both of those things together, you can find all about that on my website, which is multidimensionalnature.com. Or if you wanted to just go right to the financial coaching piece, you could also go to financialabundancecoach.com. And then I also am a plant spirit wisdom teacher. So I have a course about how to communicate with plants. We do work with flower essences in that course as well. And um, I just love the essences. That's just what's coming up for me so much. I'm like, they're a part of everything, the essences. They're just amazing. And then I also, as you mentioned at the beginning, I'm the host of the Plant Spirit podcast as well. So can check out more there.
Is there any final word that you or thoughts that you'd like to share about this really big and complicated topic?
Oh man. Yeah, there is so much. Let's see what just kind of to wrap up here. So the big invitation in this life is for us to be fully embodied in who we are. And this is really challenging given how our society is structured. And when we are fully embodied into who we are, we can fully step into our life's work in the world. And so if there is anything, whatever it is that is holding you back from doing that fully, work to clear those blocks out, because I'm like, we don't, there's no time to waste here. Like, let's fully be who we are so that we can fully step into the big healing work that we're doing on this planet. And so if the block is around money, if the block is around, any kind of inner work that you are working with, work with that, because just like how the plants, when they are fully expressed in who they are so radiant, and that is possible for each of us as well. And the plants show us directly how this is possible. So that, I think, is really the parting sentiment for today, of just how it is possible to be fully embodied and radiant, and to do whatever it takes to clear out whatever is holding us back from experiencing that.
Thank you. That's just perfect. Thanks for spending time with us, Sarah.
Thanks again, Sarah. Bye-bye now.